Before Columbus, the Melungeons, America's enigmatic outcasts. They were neither whites, nor Indians, nor Negroes. These chilling words, scratched into the journal of John Sevier in the 1780s, unveiled a riddle that has haunted American history for centuries. Long before the English planted their flags on the eastern shores, French explorers stumbled upon a shadowy people deep in the Tennessee wilderness, strangers who might have been the first non-indigenous settlers to claim the untamed heart of North America, decades before the colonies we know took root. Subscribe to native legends and history stories and plunge into the shadows of America's hidden past, where the truth defies everything you've been told. Could a forgotten band of Europeans have carved out secret enclaves in the wilds of Appalachia, over a century before Columbus's sails ever breached the horizon? The evidence we've unearthed threatens to shatter the very timeline of American colonization. High atop the jagged peaks of Newman's Ridge, along the treacherous borderlands of Tennessee and Virginia, a people unlike any other forged a life in isolation. These were no fleeting wanderers. They built enduring villages in the shadowed hollows of Snake Holler, Mulberry Gap, and Blackwater Creek, places so remote that even today, the modern world barely touches them. No railroads pierce these mountains. No interstates carve their way through. Only a handful of twisting, perilous roads dare to breach this forsaken frontier. What set these mountain dwellers apart wasn't just their choice of such unforgiving terrain. It was their very essence. Dark, wavy hair-framed faces with sharp European features, aquiline noses, piercing eyes that flickered from midnight brown to storm cloud gray. And then there was the mark that left early witnesses speechless, a strange, unmistakable bulge at the base of their skulls, a trait that whispered of origins beyond comprehension. We have found men who are neither white nor red nor black. A French explorer scribbled in his frostbitten journal in the late 1600s, his quill trembling as he recorded the encounter. Their speech is a jagged patchwork, guttural and foreign, yet laced with echoes of Portuguese or Spanish. They are a people out of time. They called themselves the Melungeons, a name as elusive as their origins. In a land torn by bloodshed between settlers and native tribes, they stood apart, neutral, silent, invisible. They raised their timber cabins, wove their own customs, and vanished from the pages of history, leaving only whispers in their wake. These people shun our wars, a missionary wrote in the early 1700s, his tone thick with unease. When I pressed them, whose side do you take? They stared through me and said, "We are Portuguese, not English. We are Portuguese, not Cherokee." Their isolation was their shield. As the frontier blazed with violence, the Melungeons thrived in secrecy, their mountain strongholds untouched by the chaos below. It wasn't until John Sevier, a frontiersman carving out the ill-fated state of Franklin, stumbled upon them in the 1780s that their existence pierced the veil. There dwells a colony of dark-skinned folk, reddish-brown like the earth itself, Sevier scrawled, his words heavy with awe. They name themselves Melungeons and swear they hail from Portugal. Their settlements sprawl across these peaks, ancient and unyielding. By 1795, the outside world could no longer ignore them. A census tallied 300 free persons of color in East Tennessee's mountains, a land with no slaves and scarcely a handful of black souls. These 300 were no footnote. They were proof of a people who'd thrived in the shadows for generations, defying every label society tried to pin on them. Dr. Thomas Wright, a frontier physician who tended to their sick, scribbled in his ledger, "They bristle at being called African, though their skin is duskier than any European's." One man seized my arm and growled, "My kin crossed the great sea before your kind ever sniffed this shore. We've always been free." As the 19th century dawned, their numbers swelled. By the late 1800s, over 700 Melungeons clung to their mountain perches. But with growth came exposure. America, obsessed with boxing humanity into neat racial cages, turned its hungry gaze upon them. Newspapers screamed headlines, "Mystery Race Unearthed in Appalachia," and "Tennessee's Strange Tribe, Neither White, Black, nor Indian." The spotlight burned hot. Scholars, armed with calipers and cameras, stormed Newman's Ridge, treating the Melungeons like specimens under glass. They prod our skulls and gawk at our young. A Melungeon elder spat to a journalist in 1890. "They've already written our story before they even set foot here." Thus began a relentless quest to unravel their enigma, a chase that would spawn wild theories, bitter debates, and a legacy of defiance. The theories ignite. Theories about the Melungeons' origins erupted like wildfire. Each outsider who scaled their ridges brought a new tale, each more fantastical than the last. When we ask, they say Portuguese, a Harvard ethnologist, reported in 1889, his brow furrowed. But how? How did Portuguese castaways burrow so deep into this savage land? The simplest theory clung to their own words: shipwrecked Portuguese sailors, flung ashore by a merciless sea, trekking inland to escape a world that would never accept them. "Our ships shattered on the rocks," an old Melungeon rasped in 1891, his voice a gravelly hymn. "We walked till the mountain swallowed us whole." Then came the Roanoke connection, a tale dripping with dread. In 1585, 120 English souls vanished from Roanoke Island, leaving only Croatonin etched into a tree. Dr. William Brownlow, a Tennessee scholar, thundered in 1878, "These are the lost colonists' kin, blended with the Croatoan Indians, who already carried Spanish and Portuguese blood. They fled inland, hiding where no one dared follow." Others sneered at romance, insisting the Melungeons were just a mongrel mix of native and African blood, a convenient box for a nation obsessed with purity. They dodged their Negro roots. An academic scoffed in 1897. The Melungeons roared back, "We were never slaves. We crossed the ocean before your kind drew breath here." Bolder theories pointed to Spain's brutal explorers. In 1540, Hernando de Soto's 600-strong army slashed through Tennessee, only to fracture under disease and native fury. Half deserted, historian James Mooney growled in 1902. "They fled to these peaks, took native wives, and birthed a new people." 2 decades later, Captain Juan Pardo's doomed 1560s expedition left its own ghosts. His men, butchered by tribes, scattered into the hills. The survivors, a scholar mused, could be the Melungeons' seed Spanish blood taking root, where no one looked. But the wildest tale stretched back to antiquity. It begins in Carthage, 200 BCE. Dr. Samuel Johnson intoned, his voice a conspirator's whisper. After Rome crushed them, the survivors fled to Morocco, then Portugal, becoming Moors. Centuries later, they sailed west, only to be spat out on America's shores outcasts who crossed the Appalachians to escape a world that despised them. An old Melungeon woman, her eyes like embers, murmured in 1917, "My kin fought Romans once. We sailed here when no Americans existed. The whites drove us into these hills, and here we stayed." Artifacts fueled the fire, European metalwork, predating English colonies, unearthed near Newman's Ridge. "Someone was here before us," an archaeologist hissed in 1932. "Someone we can't explain." If they predated Plymouth, Jamestown, even Roanoke, what does that mean for America's story? "Your history starts too late," a Melungeon elder sneered in 1920. "We were here first." The Fade and the Revival. Classified as free persons of color, the Melungeons were barred from fertile lands, forced onto rocky ridges where crops withered. "The law keeps us high and hungry," a farmer grunted in 1912. "But up here, we're free." Then came the 1930s. Education cracked their isolation wide open. Young Melungeons descended the ridges, chasing dreams in cities far beyond. The young don't stay. A postmaster sighed in 1945. The ridge is emptying. By the 1960s, their olive skin and skull bumps had vanished, melted into America's vast stew. The Melungeons are gone. Anthropologist Edward Price lamented in 1971. Their traits erased. Newspapers mourned. Appalachia's mystery people vanish. The world moved on. Until the 20th century, when Ancestry.com and DNA kits lit a match. Everyone wants a piece of the mystery now. Historian Nancy Morrison chuckled in 2004. Shame turned to pride. Reunions swelled with seekers. In 2010, DNA tests promised answers but delivered chaos. African, native European markers clashed in a genetic kaleidoscope. It's a mess, Dr. Michael Thomas snapped in 2015. These tests can't reach back far enough. The Melungeons faded before we could capture them. The truth remains a phantom. Were they sailors, colonists, ancients, or something else entirely? In Appalachia's crags, the Melungeons whisper still, "We were here, and we defy you to know us." Subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories. Unearth the secrets of America's forgotten pioneers beyond the lies of your textbooks.